Hey there, Willowbrook. Thanks for doing Daily Devos with us. My name is Bobby Ann, and today we start a new book, the final book in the Old Testament, the book of Malachi. Malachi is a prophet who is sending a message by God to the nation of Israel. Malachi is an incredibly blunt prophet. There's no beating around the bush when he gives the message from God here. And he begins his message to Israel in verse 2 when God is having a conversation with Israel, and he says this. He says, I have loved you, says the Lord, and yet you say, how have you loved us? It makes me think of parents with teenagers. Now, I have a teenager who lives in this house, and the majority of the time, that's a really pleasant experience, but not always. She's still a teenager, and there's still times when we put some boundaries in place for her that she doesn't always like. The kind that even if she doesn't voice it, she may have an inner dialogue that says, well, don't you even love me? Why would you do this to me? And then the nation of Israel is responding in a similar way that a teenager might respond to a parent who is putting some things into place because they love them. In fact, the whole story of the Old Testament up to this point is a story of God saying, Israel, I choose you. You're mine. You're my child. And I love you. And Israel rebelling, and God putting some boundaries into place, pursuing them, bringing them back, loving them despite their rebellion. It reminds me of I can say my very favorite lyric in any worship song is in the song Reckless Love. It says this, it says, when I was your foe, still your love fought for me. And that's what God's love does for the nation of Israel. That's what God's love does for us through the gospel, through Jesus. When I was a sinner, when I deserved death and hell, when I was an enemy of God, still his love fought for me, and his love has been fighting for Israel. And yet they say, how have you loved us? They're looking at the situations they've been in, exiled to the nation of Babylon, not understanding that in all of this, God has been pursuing them. God has been going after them. And then we keep reading as we go through the chapter. Verse 6, it says, a son honors his father and a servant his master, but I, God, I am a father, and where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is your fear for me? And then they say, yet you ask, how have we despised your name? You see, the people of Israel, what they have done is they have come to God half-heartedly saying, yeah, we want you to be our God. We want you to be the Father. Let's sign some adoption papers. We'll take that. And they've treated it like, hey, we'll take the part of father. That means we'll throw some baseballs in the backyard, or hey, you can pick up the bill for dinner. But they've neglected the part when God says, hey, I need you to clean your room. They have not treated him with the honor that a father deserves. They've half-heartedly come into this relationship with God as father and master. God goes on in this chapter to say, hey, I wish somebody would have the guts to shut the temple because the sacrifices you're bringing me are half-hearted. It'd be like somebody saying, hey, you know what? Every time that you go in to a worship service and you sing words that you don't mean, like, God, you can have my whole heart, but you don't really mean it. It would be like God saying, hey, we're going to shut the doors to this place because you're only bringing me half-hearted worship. Or you show up on a Sunday morning and you look good and you say all the right things, but the rest of the week you're doing whatever you want. God says, where is the honor for me as your father and your master? You know, half-hearted Christianity is really an easy thing to fall into. We live in a culture where trusting God, living fully devoted to God is certainly not on trend, okay? But God said, hey, as your Father, I have a good plan for you. You may not understand it all. It may not all feel good, but I am in pursuit of you. Just as some of you may have had experiences parenting a toddler or a teenager, there's not a big difference there. And you've put some boundaries in place for them that they don't like. God is doing some of those for us. And just as a parent does it out of love, God does it out of love for you. And he wants our wholehearted devotion to him, to say, God, I'm not always going to get this right, but I want to give you everything I have, to fully rely on you, to lean into you, to even when there's circumstances I don't like, to trust that you have my best in mind, that you are in the process of transforming me in this sanctification process. And God, instead of resenting it or resisting it, God, I'm going to relax into it. Malachi says some pretty blunt words. And when I think about that, I say my bluntest words to the people I love the most, the people who live in this house, my kids, when I call them out on something. And I do it because I love them, not because I'm beating around the bush. And God has some blunt words for us. Would we receive them knowing that he loves us and he desires the very best for us? I hope that you'll have a happy Wednesday.